Welcome to our third online session. My name is Lebo Biko, and together with my business partner, Rehema Isa, we've adopted her in my family, Rehema Isa, we are co-founders of Womenomics Africa, whose purpose really is to ensure that women participate meaningfully and drive economic growth across the continent, and we connect them to each other and to ecosystem partners, to information and to opportunities, so that we can see that realization. For us, it's about having half of the $3 trillion market that Africa has the opportunity to access by doing more business with itself. We have these sessions, this is our third session, so if you haven't joined us for the last two, welcome, and we hope to see you in many more. But the purpose of these sessions was really in response to the environment that we find ourselves in, which was about saying, how do we create a platform where for many women entrepreneurs, and even those in corporate actually, the space to think and to figure out how you show up in a very new normal, in a new environment, both for yourselves and for your business, is often a very lonely space. If you're not sitting in your study trying to figure it out yourself, it's very difficult to be touching base with other people to do that practically. And so this platform is really created in partnership with Solidaridad to say, let's put together a space where we can share information about business, about personal development, but more importantly, that we can create a space where people can engage, can connect, and hopefully as we go along with these sessions that people can find ways to collaborate. And so we've made a commitment to have these sessions twice a week, which is why today is on a Tuesday and not on a Monday, but usually on a Monday and a Friday because we had a holiday yesterday. And we've committed to do it for 90 days. And so this is our third week that we're doing so. And so we'll be doing these over the next couple of weeks. So welcome to, I think, what is a very important topic for us that we are looking forward to unpacking, because I think last week we thought that lockdown, before the president came on TV on Thursday, last week we all thought that lockdown would end this Thursday. By Thursday evening last week, we know now that it's the end of the month, apparently. But Professor Karim yesterday, those of you who watched that fascinating presentation live last night with the Minister of Health and Professor Karim, we're quite certain that we're in for the long haul. And so even the end of this month is not really guaranteed that things will return to normal. I think we're in it for a while. And so I think this topic is very opportune because it really forces us to rethink the way we viewed our businesses, rethink what that means for our businesses going forward, creates a space, I think, just for reflection around what does that business look like? What is it offering? What do you need to be thinking about differently in order to, yes, survive the current, but actually begin to look what your business needs to look like going forward. So before I hand over and introduce Shimen, I just want to go through just some housekeeping rules. As you will notice, those of you that have joined, you are on mute and your video is off. You'll remain on mute and your video will be off, at least for the duration of Shimen's presentation, which will probably be about 20-25 minutes. Thereafter, we will open up for questions and answers and engagement, which we hope you will contribute to. If you look onto your Zoom platform, whether you're using the app or you're using the web version of it, there's a place there for chatting. If you can begin to pose any thoughts or any questions that you have in the chat, and you direct it to the panelists, which will include myself, Rehema, and Shimen, who will be able to see it. And then when we go into the questions, we will ask the people to ask the questions in that order. There is also an option to put up your hand. So if there's anything you want to ask or question as we're going through the presentation, we'll make sure that we engage you on that. But for the duration of the presentation, your mic will be on mute, your video will be off, and it's only when we start the session where we're engaging with everybody that we will unmute those and allow your voices to come into the room, which we hope you will do. And so without much further ado, I would like to introduce Shimen. Shimen, I only got to meet a couple of weeks ago as we were talking about how do we begin to facilitate really helping entrepreneurs to get better skilled, and better prepared for entrepreneurship across the continent. And it was a wonderful conversation when we did engage. And so when we had thoughts about this session, it was wonderful that we could think about Shimeen, who's got a wonderful combination of skills in working with entrepreneurs, but also in academia. And so she brings that to the fore today, as she gives us some thinking, I think, and some nice framework and some tools, I think, for entrepreneurs to use to reflect on their own businesses around how to navigate the current environment, as I said, but also going forward. So without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Shimeen, who will engage with us for the next couple of minutes with her thoughts that I hope allow people to begin to engage and ask some questions a few minutes after that. Good morning, and thank you, Shimeen.
Thank you. I'm just putting something up here. Good morning, everyone. Sanibonani, Molo, how's it? Hello. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Womenomics, to Lebo, and to Rihanna for allowing me the space to add value to your journeys, and also the opportunity to get up and get dressed this morning. So thank you for that. I hope wherever you are, you're safe and healthy. That while we're living in challenging times, especially for entrepreneurs, I hope that, that you have gratitude, love, hope, faith, courage, and strength. Because that's what's going to sustain us in our roles as entrepreneurs, but also as mothers, providers, daughters, sisters, friends, members, leaders. Because ultimately, responsiveness and resilience sits within us as people and within those roles in terms of how we execute and action it. And I also want to say upfront that while today is about the technicalities of how we navigate and negotiate this tumultuous, uncertain times, to remind us that we're also part of a collective consciousness, a universe where, that has a sacred and divine component that allows us to connect with and draw from. And it provides critical support. And sometimes things have to go wrong in order for us to find our right. So I'd like us to remember that while my conversation is not about that, it's a space that I subscribe to and deeply believe in. And so I hope that you too find that for yourself as we go forward. So what exactly is today's discussion about? The dance of resilience and responsiveness in the time of Corona. I chose it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I like dance, and no, today is not a dance class. Number two, how we got to the topic was a bit of a dance in terms of the conversation between Rehema, Lebo, and I. We started somewhere else and then came to kind of a question around what actually would add most value at this point in time, rather than me kind of sharing my philosophy and approach to business. And number three, it's because life is a kind of dance. I see it as a kind of dance where we find our tempo, our melody, our rhythm, our lyrics, our timing, our stepping to and through it, and learning when to turn, pivot, twirl, change direction. And also, like, there's the constant dance between our personal and professional lives, our relationships, and in our business. So what then is resilience and responsiveness, and how do I locate it within this conversation I'm having today? So I found this nice organizational definition of it, and it says that it's the ability of an organization to resist, absorb, recover, and adapt to business disruption in an ever-changing and increasing complex environment. So that basically means there's a whole lot of things shifting, that on an external, ever-changing, increasingly complex external environment, and then how it impacts on what's happening inside, internally in terms of your systems, your processes, and your other organizational imperatives. I also want to say that resilience acknowledges the present, but it is forward-looking. So it starts getting you to get yourself out of your silo and out of your box and start looking forward. And responsiveness is about your relevance and how you serve to your context, to your culture, to your economy, to your market, and even your employees. Is your value proposition relevant? Is your product or service still relevant? Is your market still relevant? So asking all of those questions. And with both of these in hand, and if you look at both of these and try to work towards both of us, it creates a kind of agility and preparedness for you in terms of a world that is changing. So basically, it's how does it allow us to get back to a place of being able to operate again, to a kind of place of business as usual. But we know for sure that in a time of Corona and post-Corona, it can definitely not be business as usual. So it's going to be business unusual. So before we start talking about the Corona, I think what I want to just remind us and get us to think about is before the Corona arrived, or as a friend of mine calls it, the Rona, we operated in a world already characterized by exponential change and challenges. What some people call a VUCA world. And the VUCA is basically a term that was originated by the United States Army War College in terms of looking at what the world looked like after the Cold War, and since has been adopted by many in the business space. And it's linked to understanding how we prepare for crisis management and disaster recovery. I mean, those are war terms, but in terms of our business models, it's around how to make our strategy and business models more agile and responsive. So VUCA basically refers to four things, and that is volatility, because we live in a world that is volatile, because there is a speed of change. You know, we went from 1800s, we went from things being manual to mechanistic to automated to digital. But within the digital space that started happening about 30 years ago to now, that there's been a speed of change, and products changing, services changing, apps changing. And so that kind of speed impacts on us, and it impacts on how we make decisions. So volatility refers to the speed of change that happens in things in your space. Then the U stands for uncertainty, which basically refers to a context to which we can predict or not predict the future. And part of the uncertainty is associated with people's inability to understand what's going on and inability to predict the future, which also presents a challenge. You can make a set of assumptions, and with those assumptions, but what we find is that even those assumptions and risks are changing because of the uncertainty. Then the C in VUCA, which is VUCA, is complexity, and it refers to a number of factors that we take into cognizance and relationships between them. And the more factors, the more complex. And under high complexity, it's impossible and hard and challenging to analyze the environment and make rational conclusions, which then impact on our decision making. And the more complex the more complex spaces are, the more difficult it is to analyze. And the last of the VUCA is ambiguity, which basically refers to a lack of clarity of how to interpret something. A situation is ambiguous, for example, when information is incomplete, or there's contradictions, or you can't actually draw any conclusions from. So it's a kind of fuzziness and a vagueness. And the more ambiguous the world is, the harder it is to interpret. But you know, this dialogue should not make us fearful. It awakens the reality of life and inspires us to cross over to live resiliently. And I thought the VUCA also makes sense when you look at it in Zulu and Swahili. It kind of comes across, it has a different meaning, which I thought actually makes sense. But in Zulu, it's VUCA, which is VUKA. But the meaning is that one of intense awakening. When you say VUCA, it means like wake up, but one of intense awakening. It's like the Americans say, stay woke. So it has that kind of connotation here. And so one needs to be aware of what is going on, to have sight of what's going on, and to rise to the occasion. When in Swahili, if somebody says VUCA, he's encouraging the listener to cross over. It's a kind of invitation to not stay where you are, but to move over. So the Americans unknowingly kind of created an acronym that makes sense in terms of understanding an environment, but also having it in terms of a call or to mobilize. So in addition to this VUCA world, I want to add to it, just in terms of understanding all of this change, and this constant change and the complexity of the change, is I want to refer to a man called Eddie Obeng, who's a British kind of thought leader, an organizational theorist and educator. And he refers to something called a world after midnight. Basically what he says is that your correct answers of yesterday may no longer be the correct answers for today. And your correct answers for today may no longer be your answers of tomorrow. And so a percentage of what you know about the world and what you know for inside of yourself in terms of your skills and competencies changes every day, because the world is changing. And so in order to stay relevant, one needs to understand that you got to go and fill those gaps or come up with more current thing. So we have the VUCA world. We have an understanding that the rate of change is happening faster than the rate of learning in terms of Eddie Obeng. And in addition to all of this, there's also stuff that we're still dealing with, which is climate change, the fourth industrial revolution, a move towards people starting to think about being more responsible in business. If you want to look at the permaculture values of earth care, fair share, people care, people starting to look at how to disrupt the present economy, moving to more regenerative economy, what's called a sacred economy, the move to more conscious consumerism, more conscious capitalism, people starting to make decisions and understanding that their individual decisions can add to the collective, add value, save the earth, save people, protect indigenous issues, endangered species. A move also to more preventative wellness being, back to indigenous knowledge systems, to homeopathy, the rise of cannabis, naturopathy. In addition, the kind of changes in our markets. Now in Africa, we have what's called the demographic dividend. And so we're the only continent in the world that is looking at more youth. It's called the youth bulge. And that means for us, understanding that our markets will be changing and that youth is now made up of the Generation Z and millennials. And what does this mean for our business? So even that, you need new understanding, new kind of business intel around what's going on there. We also live in the time of big data and business intel, and we need to understand what is that a source of for us? What can use that for? So I need you to understand that even before CoRona arrived, all of these changes were happening. And most of us, when we set our business model and we set our strategy, it's usually a 3 or 5 year plan. And how many of us go back and kind of interrogate this at intervals, instead of lots of us just set a course and we move on and we kind of deal with the obstacles as they arise, instead of looking for different ways of getting there. So basically, it's a world that we live in that doesn't allow one or makes it difficult for us to predict, analyze, and have sight of what this world is going to be like, and also the possible consequences for our business. And I say this also for us to understand how fragile some of the decisions we make when we make it within these spaces. Because we really, I think CoRona just was a kind of curveball that none of us saw coming. And what that has done to us is not just in terms of our business, to our way of life. So coming back to CoRona, some of the kind of futurists and scenarios that are emerging of what is happening now, and also what possibly a post-COVID world COVID-19 world could look like. I just want to share you, I kind of did a squiz on it and thought, let me just share this to you, because in addition to what we've just spoken about, or just informed you about, is all of these other changes that will also have implications for your business and your decisions and your business model. There'll be more awareness of health and sanitization. So people will be more aware, where we have mass gatherings, when we go into supermarkets, people are going to be insisting on better health regulations and controls, which means policy might change, which means a whole lot of things. In terms of employment, our health in South Africa, our Health and Occupational Act doesn't make provision for things like viruses. And who knows what this can do for us. It might have to change, which will put more pressure and demand on employees. There's been a rise on online. I think we've all seen it. We're now online in terms of Zoom. There's been other products in terms of, there'll just be a whole digitization of products and a rise in e-commerce platforms, which we're already seeing. I did a quiz last week of all of this whiteboard and Microsoft and Google Hangouts and something called Simple Thinking, but that you can use in a Zoom environment or in an environment where you're having a digital seminar. So all of the tools within even how we engage online is going to change. There'll be more people working from home. And what does that mean for us? People are not walking into your stores. How then are you going to reach them? Will your products still have relevance? It's also been said that I listened to an Australian futurist, and he said people go back to living more simple, modest lives, because this lockdown has shown us how less we need and how less we need to survive on. It's also going to show us how to save money, also going to show us how to live differently and modestly. That might be different for South Africa. It might be different for Africa because we're more inspirational communities and societies. But definitely, I think there's going to be a move. And I agree with this one thing. There's also going to be a conservatism in spending. People will move, besides just linked to the simplicity of living, people will move more from spending money on luxuries to spending money on essentials. Because I think this also gets people to think about what they have saved for. You know, it's saved for a rainy day, not for a CoRona day, but people are going to start thinking what next. And so how do they make sure that their lives that they spend is going on essentials? There's also been talk of living off the land, people being more self-sufficient, people also moving away from cities. Now, what we know in terms of scenario planning, that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have 65 or 70% of the world's population living in cities, and cities have already been planning for this. And now futurist thinkers are saying, you're away from cities, living more kind of off the grid, being more self-sufficient. So we're going to see this economic contraction in individuals, with families, with businesses. And it's going to impact on various things. I mean, we've seen how border closure now translates into loss of income for many people in Africa, especially small-scale traders, how that's impacted on transport, also how salaried workers and entrepreneurs like you and I, or self-employed people, are starting to look at how this impacts on income generation. So the good news is that there's some companies, only 12% of them apparently. There was a survey done about a month ago looking at how many companies were COVID-19 ready, and it was only about 12% of people, companies, who they have actually thought of this kind of crisis and they are ready for it. So that means like there's about 88% of companies, big corporates, small companies, wherever you are, want to extrapolate from them, that is not ready for the COVID-19. And we've seen since the lockdown, and also we've seen around the world since the other countries have locked down, that some people have been resilient and have kind of stepped up and are making change already, but some people haven't. And if you have that old bureaucratic corporatist type of thinking, then you feel stuck, kind of shoes of cement. And so part of what we're going to talk about now is how we make those changes. So I see I'm spending too much of time telling you about all of these things. I want to go quickly through, and it's already 9:29. So I'm just going to skip through some things. And just tell you the kinds of things that I've put together for you is a kind of very simple, practical solution, some common sense things that you already know. And I took it from various pieces and understandings and toolkits. And it's to give you a kind of 360-degree view of your business. And it's basically getting you to understand that you need to have sight of what's happening in your environment. And sometimes we're so focused on what's happening inside of our environment that we do, of our businesses, that we don't look at what's happening outside. Basically looking at the why, what, how, and whom, and with whom that we're doing business. I also want to say that this is not an answer. This is not an answer for all of you, but I'm hoping that in here somewhere you will find things that reflect and resonate with you. And while you look at this, also think about your business, like Lebo said, within the space now, but look at how you can use it to future-proof, because ultimately resilience is about future-proofing your business. So the first thing is reflect. So you see that I like alliterations. And so I just put all of these things that I know into alliterations. And it kind of went with the CoRona as well. So the reflections around pausing and reflecting is, number one, looking at our products and services versus looking at our value proposition. Now, value proposition is basically how we deliver, how we understand, how we identify, and how we communicate and deliver the value. It comes from a move in entrepreneurship where you move away from your products and services and ideas to your customer and looking at how you create value for your customer. So at this point in time, the question you need to be asking yourself, is your products and services still adding value for your customer? Now, Airbnb, a company that has a platform that allows all of us to become lodge owners, and more recently added experiences to their platform that allow you to have experiences. So they find you places to stay and they find you experiences to have. They did something very interesting. They've now moved on to online experiences. So they looked at what they had. They had people, they had this platform, they had access to people, they had access to people who offered experiences, and they went out and they did a call for people who now can offer online experiences. So now you can do a virtual cycle tour, you can do a cooking class, you can learn a language, you can do all of that. So suddenly an accommodation organization is doing something else. An organization called Bottles, an app in Joburg in South Africa that used to deliver alcohol, is now partnering with Pick n Pay, which is, I see Eva is here from Poland. Pick n Pay, Eva, is a grocery store, and they're now delivering for Pick n Pay because Pick n Pay's online delivery services has a big backlog. Looking at Uber Eats doing the same thing, but basically people are starting to look at what it is they have in terms of a resource or an IP or a value proposition and seeing how they can apply it differently. So we're also seeing that in terms of a delivery mechanism. So we're seeing that people who offer exercise is now, or training or learning is going to online platforms. So it's looking at your value proposition and looking at your delivery mechanisms. And I suppose the reflection also has to ask you whether you have these resources and what this means for you. People are looking at, I was reading an article that said people are looking at converting shop spaces into storage spaces because they're going to now start selling online. And so what I think the point I want to make is you need to go back and look at what is it that you own and move away, step away and have a more kind of macro and wide view lens of your product and service. And within that, look at what your IP and value proposition is. You can apply it differently. The other thing to look at is uncertainties and risks. And that's kind of just looks at what is uncertain for you now and what is the risk. I'm going to just go through quickly and you can ask me more questions around this. And look at the kind of main drivers of your business, if it's technology, whatever it is, and how that constitutes an uncertainty or a risk. What are the main factors that have potential to impact on the future of your business, and what are within your control and what are not within your control. So it's basically looking at vulnerabilities and risks of your business. The World Economic Forum identified categories of risk for your business, and it's economic risk, environmental risk, geopolitical risk, which is basically policy, foreign policy, and how it influences domestic and other kind of social policy, societal risk, and technological risk. You can also apply what's called a SWOT or a PESTLE, which is political, economic, social, tech, and legal and environmental. But people are now adding also demographics, looking at diversity, intercultural, ethical, and ecological ways of understanding business. So this might seem like a lot of work, but I think what it starts building in you, a practice of understanding your business outside of your products and service and operations and clients, but seeing it within a context, and gives you a kind of systemic understanding. And so you understand, and you'll start training yourself to see that when things change in the context or within the internal imperatives is when you need to start changing stuff. And it gives you a kind of, it starts building a habit of constantly going back and doing this. So the next R is review, and what is the implications for you? How do you plot these business, what is the implications for your business model and strategies, and what kind of considerations you should be making to pivot or to make changes? But more importantly, these things that you are called upon to think about, are they consistent with who you are? Are they consistent with your company values? Are they consistent with your company's mission and mandate and objectives? And you have to change some of that as well. And I think what this causes us to do is something called effectuation. We learn to stop and do what we can with what we have where we are. And so like the simple thing of the Airbnb and bottles and Uber Eats, where they're re-looking, they have cars, they have people, drivers who can deliver. So how can they provide the service differently and not just do food and people? And that entrepreneurial mindset or effectuation causes you to also look at opportunity, not just the problems and how you solve it, but how then is this opportunities for you? And it requires you to be brave and bold, not be reckless, because some of these questions that we're asking are also questions that help you understand the risk in it. And so also to look at how do you mitigate risk? What does this mean? You know, do you need an extra outlay of cash? Do you need to get into partnerships? Do you need to get more resources, get more technicalities, whatever it is? What are those risks for you? How does it impact on your business in the long term? And what do you do now to mitigate it? The other thing to think about here is if you are going to make decisions about change is, do you need to get into other ecosystems? Do you need to partner with people who can help you deliver on stuff? Do you need to redefine your value proposition? And what does that mean for you? So we talked a little bit also, I did mention a little bit about skills, infrastructure, partners, etc. Now there's an organization called Gartner, and they say that there's 5 layers of organizational resilience. You need to look at your leadership and culture. So have you got a resilient mindset? Because ultimately resilience is, culture is determined by leaders. And what they're finding is, what they're predicting is that the context of COVID-19, strong leaders create a central and clear list of priorities, and they pursue a non-binary approach to problem solving and to understanding the world. So it's not a black and white world, it's a gray area. And so how do you make decisions within gray? How do you make non-binary decisions, more kind of scope and a sliding scale of decisions? And how do you remain honest and empathetic? So good leaders provide good resilient cultures. So resilient leadership is something that's on the rise that actually links to resilient cultures. The other thing is about the people and your staff, is do they have the right skills? Do you have a set of staff or a group of staff that are willing to learn? They have the emotional, mental, and physical stability to deal with stresses. They can work from home. They have the emotional intelligence to self-regulate and manage working from home. That you start creating psychological safety and certainty for them within the kind of uncertain times, that they're comfortable and they have that the new space still keeps them engaged and have increased performance. And then the 4th layer is around processes and systems. Is, do you have processes and systems that can be easily changed, or have you created too many controls, too many rigidity to your systems that can't be easily, too many checks and balances? So how do you make sure that you have controls in place, but your processes are fluid, your processes are simple and effective and efficient. And the last is the infrastructure. So those are the 5 layers in terms of looking at how you build resilience. So resilient organizations also, and in thinking about all of those things, you need to think about being adaptable, responsive, proactive, independent, interdependent, and integrated. I'm going to skip over some things and just go over to the last 2. And I apologize, I'm talking too much as usual, that I'm not kind of getting into all of this, but I hope that some of your questions will get us to reinterrogate some of the pieces that I'm skipping into. So the refinement is looking at how do you apply now these considerations for the business. Now you thought about what the issues are, you thought about what the implications for your business is, and now how do you apply this? How will they work? Will they work? What are the risks? You've thought about the risks before, but you're also going to mitigate the risks in the question before and now. What are some of the challenges, operational resources challenges, and so how do you refine this? So in the section before, we kind of looked at it in its totality. Now, what is relevant for you and what threads can you pull on in terms of including that in your model? I think I want to add here is that we need to understand resilience as a strategic imperative. And we need to understand that it has both a cost and a benefit. So a cost means that it may require investment beyond what is necessary and what you have within your means. And whether it's to change your brand, it's to come up with a new product, it's to launch a new product, etc. And so it's important for you to understand resilience as a strategic. It's no more an option. It's a strategic imperative now and has to be included. Okay, so the other thing that is a tool is something called an impact matrix. And it's a business impact analysis matrix, but I'm not going to talk about it here, but I'm giving it to you so you can remember that what you then do in order to understand how you pull these threads together and implement them is you can use a business impact analysis matrix, which you can download. And it's a matrix that helps you make decisions basically and see, create categories, create time frames. So it becomes like a little project management for you around the changes you want to make. And then the 4th R is to reframe. So once you've refined, you're now going to reframe your business model, reframe your strategy, look at your financial model, look at your input and output costs. Ask yourself the questions whether this is possible for you. Use your gut, use your intuition, use your mind as a discernment, and use your practical and common sense in terms of how you do this. There's also a whole lot of decision-making matrices, and you can always contact me later or through Rehema. I'm happy to share those with you, and how you apply these to your models and strategies, how you find partners, whether it's going to require more marketing, etc. And then the 5th R is the Ramba, which is basically how you go and implement this. So how you take all of these decisions, how you've taken this matrix, how you've made the decision on what you're going to change, where you're going to change, how you're going to change, what you're going to do with whom, and you start implementing it incrementally through your business. And so you invest in what's needed, you find the resource, you find the partners, you go out and you implement, and you enjoy the dance. And then the last R, which I've added as the last, after thinking about what then, is repeat. When I say repeat, I mean you go back and you look at the 5 R's again. Because what we need to understand is that if the world is constantly changing, and if this COVID space is going to be, lockdown is going to continue, and if the world after COVID is going to change, in addition to all of the exponential changes that happen, that you constantly got to go back and interrogate your business model. When anything, if you read a headline, you need to see what the implications, or ask yourself the implications for yourself. So the last R is repeat. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I have sent Rehema 2 documents. Harvard Business Review just released something with a whole lot of very detailed support around looking at surviving COVID-19 and post-COVID. And then a nice practical, it's a bit complicated, but practical, if you kind of just understand it in simple language. Deloitte developed a Respond, Recover, and Thrive 3-step support to businesses, looking at a kind of mild disruption to kind of harsh economies and how that works. And that might be additional stuff for you. And so I'm going to leave it there. And I'm sorry that I went over time. I really thought I didn't have enough to say, but clearly I said too much. So thank you.
Thank you, Shimin. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And thank you so much for providing the context. I think for me, it's always a reminder that what you're saying, as you said in the beginning, is that some of the stuff is stuff that we do know. But it's only when you are thrust into spaces like this that you actually think that you have to do it. And I think in my corporate life, we always talked about the fact that it's important that you disrupt yourself before you are disrupted. And doing this continuously is always important. And we always wait until we're in a difficult environment that we think, now what? So thank you so much. And I think thank you so much for providing the context around the 5 R's. I think it's an important framework that, people won't have the answers necessarily here, but if you take that away and begin to question your business using that framework, I think it begins to at least provide some enlightenment in terms of some people's journeys. So thank you for that. And I would like to invite those that are participating in the call to please indicate if they'd like to ask a question. I'd be quite keen to understand what people's experiences have been. Have they done some form of this? I think even in the absence of a structured framework that you've put together here, there has to have been some reflection for people and their businesses over the last couple of weeks. And I'd be interested in what has come up for people as they've thought about, the relevance of their value proposition and whether it's still meeting a market's unmet needs or not, or if those needs have changed and how have they begun to deliver. But just perhaps to kick it off, if anybody does have a question, there's a button there that says raise your hand. If you'd like to raise your hand and ask a question, we will unmute you and allow you to come in. So please do indicate if you'd like to ask a question. But I will kick off with the first question, and hopefully we'll get some more coming through. But you've gone through these 5 R's, and really given us a sense of what are some of the questions that you have to be thinking about as you go through each of them. I just want to have a question for you, that given this environment that we're in, I mean, we've given coronavirus, I think, sits firmly in this VUCA world that you've talked about. So it really is an example of a VUCA experience that we're going through. In your experience of working with entrepreneurs, which aspect of that R have you found has been the most challenging for entrepreneurs, or requires the most attention for people to actually look into? And what I think audiences would have seen as part of your profile, that you've been at the helm of the Center of Entrepreneurship at WITS, and so have engaged very much with many of those entrepreneurs over time, and do currently even your work as you do across the continent. But what would you say is the 1 R that requires a lot more attention, because it is one that for entrepreneurs, it takes a while for them to wrap their heads around, and they need to consider quite a bit?
Yeah, I think it's the reframing. So sometimes people kind of got some of the R's in place, but what do you do with the information that you're pulling from it? So reflected, and you kind of realize, well, I need to change this, and I need to do that, and I need my value proposition needs to change. But how do you pull all of this now back into your business model and your strategy? What are the kind? So, you said something in our last meeting, which I find is very, very important, is if you don't ask yourself the right questions, you're not going to get an answer that's going to eventually inform. You're not going to get the right information to inform what it is you're going. You can always get you can get the response for yourself from a wrong question that you ask yourself, but to ask the right questions around what is priority for me now, what is going to mitigate this present situation, what is within my means. I talked about effectuation. The simplest place to start off with is what can I do with what I have in terms of where and where I am. And so how do you take that philosophy and then redesign So it's, you can do the reflection, you can do the refining, you can do all of those things. But if you don't make the decisions about what aspects, what is relevant, so it's a kind of fine tuning of what makes sense for us. And that also comes from a kind of honing in on your craft and understanding what resonates for you. Because I think a big thing, and entrepreneurs will tell you that, is their gut and intuition. So even while you're going through this process, what is making you stop? What is resonating? What is kicking you in the gut that's making you stop and saying, this is the thing and this is the thing? And I'm not saying that you go and swing a pendulum to make the decision. It's also done on logical, evidence-based frameworks. But what of that is important that you can then go and apply to your new business model and strategies, or refined business model and strategies.
Great. Thank you for that. I see we have a comment and some thoughts from Michaela. Michaela, would you like to just add a bit more to what you're saying? Can we unmute you so you can share with everybody your thoughts around this pausing and reflecting that you've put up? Rihama, will you unmute? There she is. Cool.
Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, Michaela. Good morning.
Hi, yes. Hi, Charmaine. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Michaela.
So I really liked the point of pausing and reflecting, and to make sure that products and services are aligned to the value proposition. I feel, after speaking to some of my colleagues and friends at various institutions, and everybody's just scrambling around and trying to see what fits now and who's doing what, and should we be doing that, and almost should we be replicating that if we're in the same industry, etc. And I think that the pause and reflect to make sure that it's really aligned to what the new value proposition is, or where we see ourselves in the future with how things are changing now. So I just see a lot of chaos and a lot of scrambling. So that point just really stuck with me, and it really is important, especially for business leaders to get sight of.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that.
As a coach, Michaela, you'll also notice that lots of these imperatives under the 5 R's, and I made it now 6 R's, is also stuff you apply to yourself. Because we also need to remember that to create resilient organizations, we need resilient people and mindsets. So I'm bringing it back to what Michaela is a coach.
I love what you said. I remember once when I was in my 20s, in your 20s and early 30s, you know what you don't want, but you're not quite clear on what you do want. And I remember talking to somebody who was like one of these headhunters, but she had become a friend, and I didn't want my current job, but I didn't know what I needed, the next one. And she asked me, and she said to me, but why don't you apply these tools that you learned in your MBA on yourself? And it's so true that for many of these tools that we learn around SWOT, around the reflective process that you're talking about value propositions, etc., we don't really apply to ourselves. And we should actually, because they are quite relevant even in our spaces. And so as we talk about, personally, Us Queen, I see your hand is up. Can we unmute you so you can ask your question or pose your comment?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Oh, good morning. I'm listening to all of this and I want to run away because I'm looking at the word that you used, which is so powerful, that I'm using to describe what I see around me, is the scrambling. And I'm also acknowledging that it is also, I suspect, informed by the financial survival. Mm. And I battle to make decisions, hasty decisions. So I'm finding like I'm almost pulling back. When people are wanting to be out there, to be known, to come up with a plan quickly, I'm finding that I'm moving in the opposite direction. Gotten off Facebook, for instance, because I feel that everybody, sorry, all coaches, every coach is saying, I can coach you, I can coach you. And I'm like, I don't want, so you're saying something about look at the changes, look at what you need to do, look at whether it resonates with you as a person and as a business. And I've always said, I want people, my clients, to have a boutique experience. And I'm battling to put in the boutique experience in the, I said, could you quickly say, I'm battling with that. So it's almost making me feel despondent, nyana, because I feel like I'm not responsive and I'm battling to be responsive. I feel like it's knee-jerk more than really looking at what do I want, all the R's that you have shared. So I don't know whether I'm crazy, whether it's natural for some people to move backwards. Is it a safe moving backwards? Is there something that I need to be looking out for there? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. So I think, you know, scrambling is definitely, because I mean, when something hits you, that it's like having an earthquake or having a tsunami when it's hit you and you didn't prepare for this. I mean, even though we knew this was happening in China and Asia and it was moving towards Europe, I think we were in a bit of denial that it was going to hit us to a point where we were going to go into lockdown, and that some of us, like, who have our own organizations or our own businesses, are going to be impacted. So I think the one R that we shouldn't have in there, the one R that you should definitely not do, is react. So to retreat a little bit is okay, because the retreat gives you time for the pause. It's what you do in the retreat that becomes important, is looking at, what am I using this time for? If I'm just using this time for panic, if I'm just using this time to look at how I can sell online, if you're just looking at that, it might solve some of your problem, or it might solve a symptom of your problem, but it's not going to actually fundamentally take you back to your value proposition. So let's go, let's just go back to what it is that you wanted to create. You wanted to create a boutique experience for people. So a boutique experience, because I actually don't know what your product and service is, and maybe you can just write it down for me so I can respond to it directly. But a boutique experience is probably going to need some kind of redefinition. Is, what does it mean for you? If it was unique, it was high quality, it was bespoke, how do you now create that in a different space? If you don't have a place that people can walk into, how do you create it online? And there's a whole lot of new tools that I'm telling you about, that you can create a virtual experience. You can get people, I mean, what this also gives us a chance to do is also get to know our clients as they link in with you. So if somebody is going to do an online shopping experience with you, or come to you for some kind of activity or product or service, like I said, I don't know quite what your product and service is. Did you write here? Is a coach and delivers conscious leadership in development. Okay, I see that you're a coach as well. So lots of coaches here today. It's about understanding that within the space of how we're talking now, how you create an intimacy. What are the different questions you ask? Is there some kind of pre-stuff you want to do? So how do you take what you would have done with the person on a face-to-face basis and translate it into an online basis, but also understanding, what does the online experience take away from the face-to-face experience that you can maybe mitigate? What is it that you can mitigate with? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But you need to ask that question. And the more I read, the more I see people are coming up with some creative stuff. And even in the space of coaching, people are coming up with some creative stuff. So yeah, that's what I want to say to you, is don't react. Use the time, your scrambling time, to pause, to breathe, and to relook at how you can deliver what you deliver.
Thank you for that, Shiman. I think it's as you said, it's stuff that we probably all kind of know, but I think in the scramble that we're talking about, there's a desperation, there's an urgency around for some people keeping the lights on even. And so this idea of saying, I have to do the next thing, and perhaps not using this opportunity just to reflect on what is it that I'm offering and to whom. And is that still relevant? And how am I offering it? Is that maybe where the relevance needs to be reflected on? It's not the what and to whom, it's the how. And for some businesses, it's really the entire what. you know.
Absolutely. And you know, Lebo, I also think, and this might be unpopular with some people, but I actually think that it's really the time for us to sit, and because I've been thinking about, you know, I was working, and since last February I'm self-employed, and I mean I'm quite grateful, and the business has been growing. But is this what I really want? These are definitely my skills. It's definitely my passion and all of those kinds of things. But is this what I want to continue to do? And how do I do this differently? How do I manage cash differently? How do I make decisions about the stuff I'm taking on differently? And so I really think that while we're reflecting on our business, this important pause is for us to reflect on us and our lives, and not about living for our businesses, but how our businesses fit into our lives. And as women, what we do is we step in, we compartmentalize, we become the leader, we become the entrepreneur, and we just push. Yes. But how then, if you want to integrate yourself and understand, because I think the CoRona has also made us understand the fragility and our mortality, and that soon, I mean, you know, any one of us could be in those statistics that they offer on a day-to-day basis. And have you done all the things that you need to do? And if you continue in the vein that you're doing, would you have regret? Okay. So it's important to understand the context, just not the context in the business, but how you contextualize it into your life.
Okay, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our session. I think we could have gone on for a while. I think people were beginning to open up, and maybe some of the reflections were landing. I think sometimes when you land, I don't want to say heavy, but the kind of material that we have in a couple of minutes, it takes a while for people to kind of reflect, and needs some time to marinate. So thank you so much, Shimen, for your time. I see we had a comment right now from Eva. She's all the way in Poland. Oh my word. Thank you so much. You joined us all the way from Poland, which is wonderful. So thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this session. Thank you to our sponsor, Solidaridad. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it at this time. But I think, Shimen, you've posed some questions that I think people will be able to take away. I think even if the light bulb didn't quite come on as much as it could right now, I think these are the kind of questions that you have to go away, go step into the garden and reflect on, actually, and begin to look at your business in a different light. So thank you very much for the tools that people can actually use after this session to begin to reflect on their personal lives, but also on their businesses too. We have recorded the session for everybody, so people that could not take notes frantically, or some of the things that Shimen talked about, it will be available probably later this afternoon, or by tomorrow morning. You should have the link to the session so that you can engage with it again, so that perhaps some things that you did miss in the session you can engage on going forward. As promised, we will be having another session on Friday, this time with a representative from Turner and Townsend, and she will be talking about business continuity and the journey that you need to travel around business continuity in line with the reflections that we've had today. So we'll be sending out that information also probably by the end of today, so that you can also sign on. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you to Shimen. Thank you to Rehema in the background. She hasn't said much this morning, but she's keeping everything going in the background with Lesego in the background. And hopefully you can join us for our session on Friday or the future ones that we're having. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day and an amazing week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.